Alright. So hi guys. Hi there. So I haven't recorded in a while, but I figured now that a tournament finished that I record some little bit of game analysis from the tournament. These games are from the Georgia Peach Open, which was played last weekend, and I was able to win that tournament through some crazy adversity. It was the first time I ever had to forfeit a game in my entire tournament history. So I was coming back for round three. I went out to eat, and was coming back from round three, and I was in a car accident. Whoop-de-doo. And I had to forfeit my third round, and yet somehow stuff worked out, and I was able to play well, and I was able to win. And so that was good. I somehow was able to get clear first in the tournament, even with the forfeit loss. So I wanted to jump through some of the games and jump through some of the, key parts of a few of the games. So if we look at this first position, it's very interesting. I was playing Sasha, who's a pretty strong kid for his age. I have 1770 up here, but he actually was closer to 1700. Although I'm pretty sure Sasha's near 1800. This position that we have is interesting. It arose out of a Nimzo Indian, and he played a Queen C2, Bishop G5 thing, and I was trying to spice it up a little. It's my first round. I outrated my opponent by a bit, so I figured I'd try to spice it up. So I allowed him to double my G-pawns, hoping for some activity on the G-file. And the moves before this were kind of interesting. I'm not going to go through all of them, but it was kind of an interesting little tangle. But I think right here is when things were starting to settle down a little bit. So we noticed that Black has a very nice centralized knight, has a very nice bishop on that diagonal there, fianchetto bishop. And White has an oddly placed knight on c1. I'm not really sure why that knight went to c1. I don't think it was a good idea. I probably should have hopped out to b3 or d3, but nevertheless, White has his knight on c1 here, and so that's definitely a factor. His queen's well placed, and we do notice that Black has this weakness in the king side, h6 and f6 and such like that. So those do represent a weakness, but when allowing these double pawns to occur, in my, reasoning, I reasoned that those weaknesses would not be that easy to exploit, seeing that Black did not have a dark squared bishop, and that I could have caused Black some problems on c3 earlier in the game that Black would have had to tend to. So I reasoned that they weren't that big of a weakness. And Black's okay here. So here, I believe it was White to move, seeing the g2 is hanging, so I'm assuming he castled here, so yes, we have castling from White. And then here was an interesting moment, because I had to figure out what to do, because there's a lot of things you can do here. So, for instance, you could play, I think a lot of players would instantly try to play, King h8 or King h7 here, with the idea of just putting the rook in the g-file. And so that appealed to me. Also, a move you'd have to look at is something like d5, just breaking up this little pawn center or something like this. Maybe bringing a rook to the c-file is another idea. Maybe even playing f5. So there's a lot of things you can look at here. Oh, and another thing is queen c6. Because queen c6 is also very forcing. Queen c6, hopping in this diagonal, would immediately pretty much force f3. Because if you play bishop f3, then I just take back, and then queen takes, and you're getting mated. So you don't want that to happen. So, yeah, queen c6 was on my horizons. So I will say the main moves I looked at here were king h8, king h7, queen c6, rook c8, and d5. Rook a c8 and d5. So what to write off? Well, okay, I wrote off d5 because I felt like, for one, this pawn was a little bit of a weakness in White's camp. Not a big one, but I felt like it was a weakness that I wanted to save for later. And I felt like by playing d5, I kind of help White out. I feel like White's pieces aren't optimally placed, and so I'd really rather not give them a bit more room to work with. So I felt like I wanted to keep that pawn there for later, because if you can imagine, let's say I pressure the pawn more, if they play something like b3, the queen will be undefended. So then a move like d5 comes in handy, because this pawn will be pinned and cannot take, and it's extra pressure to the pawn, or even b5. So I don't want to play d5. The next move, or to be honest, the move that I considered even before d5 was queen to c6 because it was so forcing. Here I felt that Black had to be a little bit better because he had this super forcing move right here. And I felt like that just, in principle, didn't seem that good to be able to force a concession like f3. And I feel like a lot of players would also jump onto queen c6. But in the end, the reason I denied queen c6 was I figured, okay, while f3 does create a weak e3 pawn, that pawn is very hard to exploit, seeing I'm not going to be using the e-file anytime soon, and also it blunts my bishop, and I felt like it was kind of maybe showing my cards. I felt like maybe I could use this whole open diagonal mating thing a bit later in the game. I didn't want to quickly reveal to him, hey, look, there's this mating opportunity here. So I was trying to keep this in reserve, so I didn't play queen c6. And then we have questions, okay, what about king h7 and king h8? Now, I rejected both of these moves. And the reason is I felt like that if I played a move like, let's say king to h8, then white could respond with f4. After f4, normally the problem is, the reason that f4 isn't that big of a threat here is because if f4, let's say I move my knight, queen takes f6, I can play queen takes e3 with check. So that's fine. I don't mind getting at e3. And also I feel like my king will be safe with that knight on g6, and I felt like that was an okay position. Like I felt like this diagonal really hurt him in those lines, so I was okay with that. But if I play king to h8, let's say f4, the knight moves anywhere. He's playing queen takes f6 with check, and then he can defend to e3. So I really didn't want to play f4 because of that reason. Or excuse me, I didn't want to play king h8. King h7 I was thinking about, but I think the problem I found with king h7 is something like f4, and then let's say, knight g6. I don't know, I felt like there might be some kind of problem with, oh, I know what it was. So my problem with king to h7 was if I play king h7, that allows for knight to d3. And knight d3 is good because let's say king h7, white plays knight to d3. Let's say I drop my queen back over to c7. Then, for one, they can play knight takes e5, and then if queen takes, pawn takes, then I'm actually not too happy about that ending because I think my d pawn will become weak. You can imagine a pawn here, 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 and there. And with queens off the board, this open g-file thing might not be as good as I thought. And if knight d3, knight takes d3, bishop takes d3 comes with check, and then king g7 might be forced. And I don't know, I just don't really like that position because I actually do feel like my king is a little bit weaker than I would like there. And I don't really have a lot of firepower, and I feel like white's pieces are active. So for that reason, I actually chose to play rook c8 and just pressure the c pawn, trying to pressure the one weakness I have here, or one of the weaknesses I have. Again, here b3 doesn't work out well for him because I can play something like b5 or d5, and so here he made a mistake. But the mistake is kind of proves why, let's say, rook c8 was, well, you'll see what happens. So he played f4. So the idea of f4 is he wants to trade his pawn on c4 for the pawn on f6, which in theory sounds like a good plan, simply because you're getting the queen closer to the king, and also the pawn on h6 also becomes weak. But it turns out this is losing if he actually goes for that plan. During the game, actually, I was a little bit worried because when f4 came, I remembered I figured some reason that f4 wasn't that great, and I think at the time I figured something like, let's say, knight g6. No, I think it was knight takes c4, bishop takes c4, queen takes c4, queen takes f6, queen c6. But then I saw rook f3, and I was like, wait, that's not working. I was like, after we trade, so we trade on c4, and then he plays queen takes f6, I was like, okay, if I play queen c6, he plays rook f3, and then he's threatening rook g3, and I'm basically getting mated. But then I looked a little bit farther, and I found there was actually something even better. So take a look at how the game ended. So we had knight takes c4, bishop takes c4, queen takes c4, queen takes f6, white cashes in. But I guess maybe pause the video here and see if you can find the win for white, because there's a forced win for white here, even though it doesn't look like it. So take a look at the position and see if you can find a forced win for white. Alright, I hope you pause because I'm about to say the answer. Ding! Yeah, the answer is queen to d5. So this highlights the problem with the knight being back on c1. Because for one, you'll notice there's only one way to really stop mate here. And the g5 square is covered by my pawn on h6, and pushing the pawn on e4 really doesn't do anything, so that really only leaves one piece that can cover. So rook f3 or rook f2 is forced. So he played rook f3. Rook f2 wouldn't have made a difference, and now queen d1 check. So if he tries to run with his king, I can play like king f2. I can play bishop takes f3, and then after he recaptures, just rook takes c1, and I'll be up for clean rook. So he played rook f1. But then my favorite move of this little thing, and I played these moves pretty quickly because I calculated, I was like, there's no way out. It's queen d2, which is really nice. Just again highlighting the weakness of white's camp. Here, white's rook on f1 is overloaded. It needs to protect knight on c1. However, also the pawn on g2 is hanging. The computer says not play knight e2 here, and it's like -4 for black. In other words, just plain out winning. He played rook f2, and apparently he didn't notice that there's just rook takes c1 here. Rook takes, the queen takes check, rook f1 here, and then he didn't resign here, which was to me a little bit strange, because if you're not going to resign here, you should play king h1, and, I guess play on down to piece, but he played rook f2, putting himself in a pin, and so then after rook c8, he resigned. So that was my first round game. I'd say it was pretty, pretty routine. I was happy with the game. Some of my play could have been improved a little bit earlier, but I liked the finish, and I liked that last little maneuver with queen to d2 at the end. That was a pretty nice finish. So that was my first game, and I'm going to pause this recording real quick, and I'll be back in a quick second and pull up my second game. We'll see what happened there. Okay, and we're unpaused. Yeah, sorry, I'm kind of new to using the whole open PGN thing, so I'm kind of switching back and forth. Also, sorry, I don't really know how to edit and not jump forward on the PGN, so when I say lines, I guess try to keep up with me in your head if you can. It shouldn't be too hard. I don't go that deep in the lines by saying, but all right, let's see what happened. So I was playing Steven Eisenhower here. He's another, young guy, but also pretty strong for his age. 1767 is about his rating. The only flaw with this kid is he plays too fast. He's pretty decent, but he plays by hand a lot, and you can really tell when he's playing, because he'll make moves very quickly. So that's the one thing with him. Hold on, let me pause again real quick. Okay, so yeah, again, decently strong kid, but plays a little bit too fast. Let's see what happens here, because I thought this game was interesting from the opening. So I played d4, you played d5, c4, c6, knight f3, knight f6, knight c3. This is the Slav, if you don't know. Very common, very solid. I play it sometimes as black, pretty good. And then he played an interesting move. He played knight d7. And so I really was not expecting to start thinking this early in the opening, but this move caused me to start thinking. Because normally in these positions, you see something like, if we go back a move, you see something like pawn to e6, or d takes on c4, or maybe even bringing the bishop out. But knight d7 is just not a move I don't know, maybe, I don't know, I've played a decent amount of Slav, but I just haven't seen knight d7. So I started thinking, why don't I see this move that often? And so the reasoning I came up with on how to proceed forward and how to maybe prove that this is not the best move order is I decided to enter an exchange Slav. Normally I hate the exchange Slav. I think it's annoying. When I'm black, I feel like white's playing for a draw if they play the exchange Slav. It's nothing scary. It's pointless. But I went for the exchange Slav type line here because I thought the knight is definitely better placed in c6, where it can simultaneously attack d4 and e5. On d7, it seems like the knight's heading to b6, and I just don't think that's the proper plan for these positions. I think you're much better off with the knight on c6. If the knight's on b6, it can be subject to tempo games with moves like a4 and a5, and I just think this is an advantage I like to play, a misplaced knight in an exchange Slav. Because if you went into a normal exchange Slav, you'd never play knight d7. That'd just be a bad idea. So I played bishop f4. I just developed my pieces. He played e6. And then here, I played a pretty decent move. I checked Livebook after the game, and it turned out this move has been played by some, decently stronger players when this line's been entered. And I played queen b3 with the idea of, one, just putting a little bit of pressure on the queen side. And also, I think the main idea of this move was to stop any bishop b4 business. Because if I play e3 here, there are some positions where bishop to b4 and queen to a5, or just bishop b4 period can be a little bit annoying because I lock my bishop out. So I played queen b3. And also, another reason queen b3 is decent is because if the knight was on c6, then queen b3 would look stupid because you could play knight to a5, kick the queen, and then maybe go to c4. But with the knight misplaced on d7, now queen b3 is a viable option because there is no knight a5 to worry about. So why not activate the queen to a nice square? So here he played bishop e7, and he's whipping these moves out pretty quickly. And here I had a bit of a think, because playing knight b5, I knew I would be getting into c7, and obviously that's something you always have to think about. So, for instance, knight b5, and then just knight c7 next. But after a good bit of thinking, I figured out that actually that was not the wisest course of action. Even though it looks attractive, after knight to b5, black can play queen a5 check, and then let's say I play, knight fd2, kingside castle, knight to c7, and then the rook can just go over to b8. And It may be a little bit hard to visualize that, not too hard, but long story short, there's just really not much going for white. There's no major discovered attacks you can do to get at the rook because you're going to be trading basically two pieces for a rook. Say knight takes e6, f takes e6, bishop takes b8, knight takes b8. You trade two pieces and a pawn for a rook. It's not really worth it. Also, you're wasting a lot of time hopping around, so you delayed the development of your light squared bishop. And all in all, even though it looked kind of attractive to put a knight on c7, I just decided that it wasn't the smart way to go. So instead I played h3, which again I think is a good maneuver to keep in mind when you're playing positions with your bishop out early. So a common idea for white to do, like let's say I played e3, that would allow black to play knight to h5, which would gain the bishop pair and take off this really powerful bishop. So before playing e3, I played h3 to allow my bishop to run. And also this is one of the computer's top moves too. So he castled, then I played e3, getting ready to develop. Looking at black's weird developing plan, I can afford to take such time because he's not really threatening anything. So he played knight to b6, which again I thought is maybe heading in the wrong direction, because moves like a4 and such can kind of bother him later. And I really debated playing a4 right now, but I decided why not just develop first. So here he played h6, and I thought this was a little bit of an error. I thought this was kind of asking for it actually. And again, looking at black's weird development and looking at how active white is and how just all my pieces have wonderful squares, and also, noticing my opponent plays a little bit fast, there's a rating difference, I decided let's go for it. It was my second round. I had a nice mating attack on my last game, so I decided, hey, g4. I didn't really think black could really punish me for this move because he's still got a while to develop. He's got to get his bishop out. Rook on e8's not going to attack anything. Rook on c8's not really hitting anything. His only real active plan might be knight to c4, and even that's not really doing much. So I didn't really see a way white could punish me. So I thought maybe I could just storm him right here, and maybe put a rook on g1, h4, g5, get into the king. So here he played bishop d6, trying to trade off the bishop. And here, it's already, white's got some pretty nice options. The computer pointed out that after bishop takes d6, queen takes c6, that white's attack would just be pretty strong, which is something just as simple as rook g1, just getting ready to play h4 and g5. And the computer basically argues that black would really miss his dark squared bishop in trying to play defense. And I agree. Also, I can queenside castle any time and throw the other rook into the attack. So the computer said that was pretty much the strongest way to go. I chose another feasible way, not as strong, but feasible. And I played knight to e5, just improving my knight. And I figured that if he took with his bishop, I could take with really either the bishop or the pawn, getting ready to remove the defender on f6, and then possibly push again forward. And then here he made a mistake in playing fast. He played knight fd7, really pressuring e5, but he allowed his queen to protect the g5 square. So I guess pause the video here and see if you can find a tactic for white that would win a little bit of material, and to be honest, really collapse black's position. Alright, I know it hasn't been long, but I hope you paused because the answer here is, well, let me tell you what I thought about first before I found the actual move. The first move that popped into my head, believe it or not, was knight to c6. And yes, I do mean this knight right here to c6, with the idea that if the line I would like to see is after knight to c6, black's bishop would be hanging and his queen would be attacked. So I'd like to see him protect his bishop with queen to c7, and then I was going to play knight c6 to e7 check, and that move would be just really pretty because I'd be getting my knight safe, so attacking his king would have to move because he can't take it with his bishop because it'd be pinned to his queen, and then after the king moves like h8, I could play knight to b5, and then I'd be on his queen and his bishop, double attacking the bishop. Let's say queen d8, bishop takes d6, and all my pieces would be protected. I'd be up a piece, and plus knight e7 just looks really cool. But then, unfortunate part is after knight to c6, the correct response is just to take the knight. I'd take the bishop, the rook would move. I'd have the two bishops a bit of a better position, but it wouldn't be quite as crushing as I felt should be in this position. So actually, the correct move is knight takes f7, which, boom, out of nowhere. Opening an attack on his queen, and his bishop hangs because he unprotected his bishop with his knight. So after rook takes, I just peeled off the bishop. And he whipped out immediately e5, which was practically, probably a good idea because he was just going to lose otherwise. So might as well try to complicate it. And it did pose me a little bit of problems. But I took here. He played queen h4, going for mate. I played just protected. He tried to reorganize his pieces, and he started thinking here, which was kind of funny. It's like, now that the game's lost, it's thinking started. But I mean, oh well, he's a good player. He'll get better for sure. He's got a really good feel for the games. Knight e6, playing decent defensively. Bishop e6. I took off the knight, and then I played this move, knight e2, which this is, I guess, an important idea to look at if you're attacking. Sometimes just simply rerouting your pieces can be very strong. In this position, I thought for a while, like, how to actually, put the nail in the coffin. I figured if my knight gets to f4, it'll be a beast, and there'll be no way he'll survive that. So just knight e2, bring the knight over. He played check, over, he took a pawn, then I played f3. So he got his pawn back right now, or one of his pawns back, but now the knight's coming to f4, and there's just not really much he can do about it. So after the knight came to f4, he was forced to sack for the knight, and then, I was able to win this position, basically. Nothing really special happened here. So, as you can see, the king's overloaded. So let me pause and pull up the next game, see what happened in round 4 after I had to forfeit that match. Let me pause recording here. Alright, guys, so this was the, fourth round game, and I was playing black against Adrian Payne. You'll notice the strength of my opponents have gone up because heading into the third round, you're playing at the top of your section. Around the third rounds when your opponents start getting around your level, per se. So we have somebody, 1919, decently strong guy, Adrian Payne, a bit of an older guy, I guess, probably in his 50s. But this game was interesting. It was a very interesting game. So, I started with e4, I played c5, I play multiple things, but today I still like playing c5. So he played the Smith-Morra, and I took, and then I played my g6 line, which I probably have to ditch, because to be honest, I'm not getting good positions from this, so this is something to I'm going to clean up this part of my repertoire. But I was currently playing g6, so I played g6 because of what I knew, and he played knight f3, which is, he's offering me again the chance to take. Here often they'll take back, and then I'll play d5, but knight f3, alright, fine. So I played knight c6, and then he played e5. And this is a move I really haven't seen, I've played this position a bajillion times, and I haven't really seen e5. They almost always take back on d4 here, so e5 struck me as kind of a hole, and there might be a problem with this. If you play a ton of online chess, and, you see a move over the board in a long tournament that you, never see in a position that you play all the time, chances are there's a reason you don't see that move. People online may know something that the guy you're playing doesn't. So I decided, actually here, I will take the pawn. I rarely ever accept the Smith-Morra, so if I do, there's a good reason for it. So I took the pawn here, because I figured that e5 pawn was a little bit too extended. So we had knight takes e3, then bishop g7, developing with tempi, so bishop f4, and then queen a5. Attacking the pawn again, saying, are you really going to give me 2 pawns for all this? So here he played queen d5, which is pretty much the best move, because if he plays something like queen to e2, trying to defend passively, which blocks in his bishop, I can play d6, exploiting the fact that this pawn is kind of pinned to the knight. So that would not have been good for him. But queen d5. And here, I don't think it'd be advisable to take that queen, because you're developing his knight to the d5 square, and it may try to hop into c7. And actually parrying that whole threat of him hopping into c7 is awkward. You might even have to play something like king to d8. And you just don't want to do that. Maybe even reckon with some move like e6 at the right moment. I don't know. It's just not something you want to get into. Instead, I went on the offensive, and I play queen to b4. Queen to b4 hits the bishop, so it's forcing action. And it also is hitting b2, so it's hinting at the possibility of taking b2, creating a fork. My opponent responding by developing and also attacking me, so bishop c4 attacking f7. But I calculated this line to force the queens off. I play e6, and the point of this move is he actually can't keep the queens on. If he plays queen to d3, I have, surprise, pawn to b5 exclam, and if queen d3, pawn b5, you'll notice that for one, I'm attacking the bishop, and for two, there's a double pin thing going on. So even though there's 1, 2, 3 pieces pressuring b5, he can't take. Because bishop takes b5, just queen takes f4, and, GG. And if he doesn't take on b5 and he moves his bishop, queen takes f4 anyway. And if he doesn't move his bishop, pawn takes bishop. So queen d3 is not really an option. And I was like, maybe he missed this, but he played queen b5 decently quickly. So I played a6, which kicks the queen, guards the b5 square, and prepares to get a tempi once my knight hits b4. Takes here, castles. And it's funny, after the game, it turned out we were both happy with our positions here. I was happy because I was up a pawn and I wasn't getting mated. He was happy because all of his pieces were active. It turns out we both had reasonable arguments for such. So for me, it was kind of hard trying to figure out what to do here. B5 really popped into my head, but I shied away from playing B5 immediately because I felt like after B5, let's say bishop E2, F6, maybe we trade an F6, and then the point is, after white plays A4, you couldn't really defend B5. You're kind of forced to take on A4, and then I felt like my pawn on A6 would become a big time weakness. So we're going to illustrate if B5, bishop E2, the idea is like, you can even just imagine, let's give white an extra move. He plays A4. I can't defend B5, so I'm going to have to take an A4, and then I feel like this A6 pawn would just be a big time weakness, and I felt if white won the A6 pawn, then white would just have a great position. And also, the A6 pawn is really easy to play against, so white would have an easy game, double the rooks in the A file, etc. Pressure me, big time. So I played F6 here, just trying to instantly undermine the center. I thought the most critical response was knight E4, but I wasn't 100% sure what was going on. I still thought I was fine, but I wasn't 100% sure what was going on. But he played the response that was a bit friendlier in my eyes, which was takes, developing my knight with the tempi. And he played bishop d6. And then here's the funny part in the game. I played bishop f8 based off a miscalculation. And it's funny, even the computer gave like 0, 0, 0 for what happens next. But bishop f8, my idea was he can play bishop e5, pinning my knight. So he can play bishop e5. And then I would play bishop to e7, so my knight's still pinned. And then he would play knight to e4, attacking that pinned knight. And I would play kingside castle. And then he would play, I believe, knight to d6 or something? Yeah, I thought he'd try for like knight to d6 after that. And then I was going to play knight to, g4? Yeah, I was going to play knight to g4. Or was I? I was going to play either knight to g4 or knight to h5 or something. But the idea was I was going to get his dark squared bishop off the board by force, basically, somehow. So playing like knight to g4, knight h5, somehow I was going to be getting that dark squared bishop off the board. Well, I know what it was. After knight d6 that line, I had knight to c6. He would play bishop f4, bishop g3, and then I'd play knight h5. And the idea is I'd be attacking his bishop, and this bishop on e7 would be attacking his knight. I know it's really hard to do this without showing you guys the moves, but if I did, I would skip to the end of the game, so I don't know how to alleviate that. But anyway, yeah, so I'll run through the line real quickly again. So bishop e5, bishop e7, knight to e4, kingside castle, knight to d6, knight to c6, hitting the bishop on e5, let's say bishop to g3, and then knight h5. And I could just dark red bishop off the board, and I'd be able to pawn. So for white, it's very important that he does not trade all of his pieces, or he doesn't let up the pressure, because then I'm just up a pawn, he's in big time trouble. So something like that may seem trivial, like, I just got the bishop off the board. But no, that can very easily go from, white has compensation to white's in a losing endgame. So stuff like that matters. However, what I missed is, after bishop e5, bishop e7, knight e4 castles, he can play knight takes e4, and if I take back with my bishop, he has bishop d6, and my rook and my knight are forked. So that wasn't really an option. I probably have to give up the exchange, but the computer still said it was okay for me, but that's not what I was looking at. So he played bishop e5, and then, surprise, I played bishop to g7, because I was like, well, okay, I messed up. And so here he went for bishop d6 again. Then I just quickly played knight c6. I was like, I will regroup. So here, honestly, I thought if I was white, I would have played a4 here. Just stopping any counterplay with b5, maybe playing for a4 playing for a5 and getting the b6 square later. But he just centralized his rook. And so I took the opportunity to quickly play b5 and, get my bishop going. Maybe finish out on my bishop. Here he played bishop d5, which I was like, okay, I didn't really see the point. It looked a little artificial to me. I mean, the threat's really to take on c6 and weaken my e6 pawn, but I just developed normally and that threat's gone. So I didn't really see a big point in that. Also, it would not have been a good idea to take that bishop with my knight because it would have just hopped his knight into a dominating square. So I just played bishop b7. And here he played knight g5, which actually is kind of dangerous almost because there were a lot of sacks on e6, and let's just say maybe the material would not look good for white, but everything else would have. Like, I don't think I can allow knight takes c6, pawn takes c6, bishop takes c6. My king's stuck and can't go anywhere, and he's just about to wreak havoc. If you could imagine a bishop on e6, a bishop on d6, a rook on e1, and a rook on d1, with my king just sitting in the center, yeah, that can't be good. So I couldn't allow that. So I just played knight to d8, defending everything, offering him to trade the bishops. He declined that trade, and then I kicked his knight back. So get away. His knight went back. And then here was another big-time decision. Two bishops in chess is generally pretty good, especially in open positions like this. I like my two bishops right now. They look great. But the question was, should I give up one of my bishops to double his pawns and give him the pair of bishops or not? So I had to think about this for a while. We were starting to get a little bit low on time, a little bit low. And at the end of the day, I decided that, yeah, I thought it was worth it to double his pawns because these pawns provided me with play. Previously, I was all in the defensive. However, after I doubled these pawns, they became a weakness, and I was able to use these weaknesses to actually start motivating my own play. And so White's so-called pressure or compensation started to fade once I showed that I could play actively in the position as well while being up material. So I played knight to f7, hitting the bishop. He ran the bishop back. And then I played knight to g5, already attacking these pawns. He played king there, drawing out his king. I could have played knight h5 here, but I think I was worried about h4. But maybe that was not worth worrying, because the computer's like knight h5 is just good. But I played rook c8, bishop b4, and I played just bishop f8. So my idea was, if I can get that bishop off the board, I'm golden. I mean, I'm up a pawn, my structure's better, and all my dark square pressure will be gone. So I'm fine with that. I do not mind that at all. He preserved the bishop, but I mean, at the same time, now that dark square bishop's not doing anything. So again, we were getting pretty low on time here. So I just played bishop e7. So now the e-pawn's no longer pinned. My king's safe. And also moves like h4, a little bit discouraged because that pawn will be running into the bishop later. So he played f4. I ran the knight back. He played knight to e4. And I figured, let me keep some pieces on the board actually here just to give him a little bit more trouble. That knight in e4 is not doing anything. So I played knight h5, hitting f4. He played bishop c3. He was very low on time at this point. I played rook to f8, king f3, and then I played knight to g5. And from here, the game continued at a very rapid pace. I actually let some of my advantage slip away somehow, but as you can see, this is where we stop taking notation. I'm clearly winning, so I did manage to let some of my advantage slip because he started playing instantly, and somehow that intimidated me because I was like, oh no, I got paranoid about letting my advantage slip, and then I did. But the point is, I was winning here, and so I was able to convert this in the long run. His time did end up killing him in the end, so this was round 3. All right, so I'm going to pause again, and I'm going to pick up for the money round, round 5. Oh, this was round 4, so round 5 coming up. Alright, and we're back once again looking at the round 5 game. So this game I was playing Dennis Dawley. You can see his rating was directly below the rating cut, and you'll notice my rating's a little bit higher than it said in the previous games, but that's because my supplement for the month was actually 1993. So my rating looks scarier than it really was in the U2000. But his rating looked even scarier in 1999. But it was kind of like Clash of the Titans in the last round for the under 2000 section. And this guy was playing the Trumpowski every single round, which was kind of amusing. But I mean, he was winning. He was 3 out of 3 with it, and he had a half-point bye. So he had 3.5 out of 4. I had 3 out of 4 going into this round. So yeah, this was for all the marbles, really. Literally, this round was worth, for me, $400, anywhere from $300 to $400 was how much money we were playing over in this round, which for me is a lot. Probably for him, not so much, but I don't know. That was a lot for me. So I was really determined in this game. So he played a Binko gambit on me, which to me wasn't really surprising, seeing he had been playing the trombone before. But there's a way you can really get a good hold of the Binko if you know what you're doing, and that's what I employed in this game. And it's where you go for this structure you see on my queen side, where I have my knight on b5, I have a pawn on a4 and a pawn on b3. That structure is really hard for Binko players to deal with. So I set it up pretty quickly, had a nice time advantage, and we got here. So I believe it is black to move here, and black played queen a6. So one of the problems you got to worry about in the Binko is there are a whole bunch of pin issues. These two rooks on a8 and b8, along with the queen, they just create a whole bunch of issues with pins, and it's very easy to lose material on tactics in the bingo. The coordination between the two rooks and the bishop on g7, the pressure with the queen, like it's Binko is great for tactical players, especially if you're playing somebody a little bit lower rated or something, and you just want to knock them out with tactics. Binko's a way to do it. So queen here actually has the threat of rook takes b5. Rook takes b5. Let's say I play queen takes b5. He recaptures his queen. I recapture my pawn. Then rook takes a3 at the end, and black has netted himself a free piece. So I can't let that happen. And so I actually was able to find a bit of a creative way to figure out this problem, and I played bishop c1. So retreating the bishop, but managing to be able to protect my rook. And with the bishop protecting the rook, now all of these, attacks really don't work because you're not going to ever really want to take the rook leading with the queen with the bishop there. So the attacks kind of don't work. So he played queen a5 here. And I played bishop d2, kind of asking the queen, like, where are you going, buddy? He played queen a6. And I said, let me see, is he feeling like a draw? Like, how does he feel about his position? I thought I was doing quite well, but I wanted to see how he felt. So I played bishop to c1, and he played queen to a5. So this told me he was content with the draw and that he did not feel like he was doing that well. So that was good news to my ears. So I immediately opened up an attacking front on the other side of the board. I played pawn to f4, coming forward, coming towards him. And, yeah, I mean, why not put the pressure on your opponent? I gotta win this somehow. I'm up a pawn, but you gotta start to convert. So I figured opening up a front on the other side was good since he was tied down the queen side. Here he played knight f6. And this actually confused me for a while because you always want to try to figure out what your opponent's trying to do. And for whatever reason, it took me a really long while to figure out what knight f6 was actually doing. It looked weird because knight f6 is closing in his super long-range bishop. Like moves like rook a1 and bishop b2, these are all possible now. So I was like, why in the world would somebody want to close off their bishop? It also weakens control of the e5 square. And at the moment, all I really saw was it was, pressuring d5, so stopping me from playing e5. But then I realized, actually, knight f6, if I play a move like h3, black can play queen to b4. And after queen to b4, they're going to be hitting e4. So let's say I play king to f3. They may, just may have some sort of sacrificial lines. I mean, I was thinking for whatever reason, rook takes b5, but looking back, that doesn't actually work. I think like rook takes b5 and somehow this rook will be hit at the end or something. Like rook takes b5 and I can't take back with the pawn because I lose over here. So let's assume again h3, queen b4, king f3. Let's imagine rook takes b5, queen takes b5, and then queen takes e4 check. And okay, maybe this isn't working, but I really would not have to find that out over the board. And actually this would be working because after queen takes e4 check, the rook on b1's hanging. So again, h3, queen b4, king f3, rook takes, queen takes, avoiding pawn takes and exchanging here. Rook takes e4 check, king f2, queen takes b1, and again, up a piece for black. So again, Binko tactics. These aren't things you want to deal with. Binko can get you real quickly. I could have quickly played h3 and ran into a mess with all these pins and such. So, noting that queen b4 was his idea, I found a pretty decent move in king f3, which really just centralizes my king. I know it's not normally something you're trying to do with queens one, but it uses the king for an effective purpose. It controls the e4 square. So that was helpful. Here he retreated queen d8, and again I had to figure out, okay, what's my opponent trying to do? Why did he play queen to d8? And so after some thinking I realized, aha, he wants to play queen to d7. And after his queen gets on d7, he'll be, I guess, threatening, if you will, queen to g4. Not really a threat, but he can play queen to g4. And he'll also still have that same pressure on that knight, which really locks down my bishop. So here I had trying to figure out, okay, how am I going to combat queen to d7? And it took a while, but I ended up coming up with an idea that worked out quite nicely. So I played bishop b2. And the point of bishop b2 was I wanted to simplify things. So there are a few things I could have tried here, like rook a2, h3 is kind of pointless because of queen to d7, but at the end of the day, bishop b2, I decided to try to simplify things. So he played as I expected, queen to d7. And then I played as, what some might find as a surprising move, but I played bishop takes f6. But the idea of this move was that this position, if you just look at it objectively, it's a pretty nice position to play as white. We were nearing about 45 minutes per player around here, and so that's not a ton of time. And you can lose to some tactics in that time. But let me add in one nice move here, rook a2. If you notice, after these simplifications, for one, I don't have to worry about any more queenside tactics. My rook's now protected by my queen in a2, and my rook can swing off the a file almost instantly. So that's always good. No tactics to worry about on the queen side. I have a powerful knight on b5. My knight can reroute to c4. And to be honest, if I want, I can leave that knight on b5 forever, and black can really never touch that knight. So my light squares are untouchable, and he has a whole bunch of light square weaknesses on the queen side. Also, those two pawns on the queen side also can run at any time. So if he starts counterplay at the king side, I'll have guaranteed counterplay with at least being able to run my pawns if he gets too involved in the king side. So I felt all in all, this was a pretty nice trade-off to go for. And also, he has a super powerful bishop with a diagonal all to himself. But my argument was, okay, what are you going to do with that diagonal, though? Because the bishop really doesn't have any squares. With d4, I can just chop it off. And other than that, there's not really a home for this bishop on that diagonal, and I can easily just keep my pieces on light squares. Maybe rook c2, maybe rook c4. There's just not much doing with that bishop. So all in all, I felt like this was a much easier position to play as white than it was to play as black. And also, I had the benefit of being up a pawn. So I thought I was good. This knight does a lot of work. It pressures d6, so moves like e6 immediately weaken the d6 pawn and such like that. So I just thought it was nice. And actually, speaking of the complexity of playing, or should I say the difficulty of playing with this position as black, my opponent immediately made an error. He played pawn to e5 right now. And so at first I was a little bit confused, and I was like, okay, pawn to e5, how am I going to confront this? I was like, okay, if I take, he puts his bishop on e5, I have a backwards e5 pawn, that can't be good. So taking didn't look good. I was like, f5, if I push f5, isn't that just dropping a pawn? And yes, it really is. So pushing f5 wasn't really an option. So that meant I probably should just let it sit there. And I was thinking about, okay, I could let it sit there, and let's say he exchanges, I can play for e5, and maybe play on the g file. Still a little bit risky, though, with my king on f3. But then after some further investigation, I remember, wait a minute, anytime e6 is pushed, d6 is weakened. Yes, okay, we know that. All right, I have a strong knight here, and also, I provoked h6 earlier, so that means the g6 was a little bit more weak. So upon further investigation, I realized, wait a minute, if I take this pawn here, he can't take with this queen, because I can play knight to c7. It's like, okay, cool. So let's say I take pawn takes. So I was like, okay, what happens here? Well, okay, his d6 pawn's weak, so rook d2, alright? So what does he do? If he plays bishop e7, I don't know, that just doesn't seem working. That pin, I can just play rook d1 and double up on it, so okay. Let's say he pushes d5. Take. Oh, look, this g6 pawn's hanging, and I can play queen d3 and double attack the d5 pawn, the g6 pawn. So I was like, okay, cool. So then I thought, wait a minute, maybe this is what he's going to do. So I was like, takes, queen takes. I was like, maybe he'll just take with the queen. I'll play knight c7, and then he'll play rook takes b3. And I was like, oh, that was his idea. Because, okay, let's say, en passant, queen takes, knight c7, rook takes b3, rook takes b3, queen takes b3, check, king moves, and he's fine. Just like rook a7 or something. Alright. But then I realized, wait a minute, takes, queen takes, knight c7, rook takes b3, I can just play king g2, exclam. And after king g2, he'll have a rook on b3 hanging, he'll have a queen on e6 hanging, and he'll have a rook on a8 hanging. And long story short, black will be losing a lot of material, no matter what you do. So it turns out queen takes is impossible. So once I noticed that, I said, okay, take the pawn. Like, alright, I've calculated it all, should be fine. What you gonna do? He thought for a while. It appears that either A, he missed knight c7 originally, or B, he missed it after rook takes b3, I can play king g2, and he's lost. But whatever the case, he didn't instantly recapture, which means to me he probably missed one of these occurrences. Or maybe he forgot about en passant altogether. I'm not sure. But anyway, he took back with the pawn, and then I played rook to d2, pressuring the pawn. Bishop e7 isn't really too inspiring because I can play rook d1, and then let's say rook b6. At the worst case, I can play something like queen d3 and just say like, alright, I'm getting this regardless. Like, there's no point in trying to hide. I'm getting what I want. So, he played pawn to d5, and then I took, and I think here is when he realized the tactic I had at the end, because he took like a long time here. He like thought for a while, and sometimes in chess when you blunder, there's like this denial stage where you're kind of like, nah, oh no, there has to be a way out. I mean, here there's really not.
But I think he was in kind of that there, what's the way out? He saw what was coming next, and I mean, at the end of the day, it's best for black to recapture. That's the sad truth. And so he recaptured, and I didn't think too long. Just queen d3, double attack. I'm attacking d5 with check. If I take it, I'm attacking g6. G6 to me looks like the more pertinent threat to defend. So once you defend that, maybe king g7, I just take in d5, and now c5's weak. And I'm threatening to have two connected passes if I get c5. And so here, Dennis resigned. And I was surprised, in a good way, but I was surprised because nobody seems to like to resign. Nobody. There was a game where a 2100 player was playing a 1700 player in this very tournament, the open section. King, knight, and three connected pass pawns versus king and knight. The king and knight somehow won because the kid didn't resign. And one of the funniest mates I've ever seen was constructed somehow with just a king and a knight. That's the only pieces he had left on the board. I don't know how that happened. Anyway, he resigned here. A respectful resignation, basically saying, I respect you played well the entire game, and I think you can convert this, and I'd rather not be defending this position the rest of the game for a sure loss. So that was that. That was the end of the tournament. At that point, I clinched at least a tie for first. Tie for first was in the bag. I was happy with that. Would have been a cool 300. And then some miracle happened in the game next to me, and they drew. There's a kid who was up like an hour on the clock and up in exchange and just winning, and yet they drew. Somehow his opponent sacked and found some perpetual somewhere with no time on his clock, and netted me clear first. But so I hope you guys enjoyed this. It was just a quick walkthrough of some of the highlights of the tournament for me, and I'm an expert now, so that's good. The next goal I'll be trying to get is master. I'd hope to get master by the end of this year, really. I was hoping to get expert a little bit earlier, but, I always knew I was at least expert strength. So, I didn't really care about getting the number because all my friends know I'm at least expert strength. So, that wasn't a really big deal. But at least now I can officially put the title next to my name. Expert. Yeah. So, master's the next goal. And, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. It's just a little bit of the highlights of my tournament. So, I will see y'all later. Bye-bye.